Hello and welcome to A News. My name is Tim Tongana, coming to you live from Baku in Azerbaijan. Here are the headlines. Iran vows to keep the Strait of Hormuz closed until Washington meets its demands, rejecting Trump's claim of total control of the waters. Ukraine strikes at major Russian grain terminals in a Black Sea port attack. And Colombia's earthquake death toll rises to 265 as efforts continue to recover the missing. All right, we begin with this. Tehran says the Strait of Hormuz is under Iran's control after President Trump announced that the U.S. had total control over the waterway. Writing on his Truth social site, the president said the U.S. might opt to keep Hormuz, but Iran's foreign minister has accused Washington of miscalculation.
Iran and the United States have made no progress towards reviving an interim peace agreement or setting a timetable for its implementation, according to a senior Iranian source. The comments came on Wednesday after US President Donald Trump again criticized Iran's leadership and claimed Washington had total control over the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's Strait Authority, however, said the waterway would remain blocked until Tehran's conditions were accepted. The June agreement called for an immediate end to military operations and gave the two sides 60 days to reach a permanent deal on Iran's nuclear program and US sanctions. But the arrangement quickly broke down. Trump declared it over in July, while Tehran later said it was suspended. Washington accuses Iran of failing to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Iran says the United States has failed to lift its blockade of Iranian ports and release frozen assets. Tehran also rejected a report that the 60-day period could be extended, saying there was no agreement to extend. Meanwhile, attacks on shipping in the region have continued. 4 crew members were killed in a suspected Houthi attack on a cargo vessel in the Bab el-Mandeb Strait on Tuesday, while a US Navy helicopter disabled the steering gear of another ship.
Now, environmental damage from the pollution in the Gulf caused by the conflict with the U.S. is one area where Iran wants compensation from Washington. Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Ismail Baghai said on X that images circulating on social media show oil pollution along the coast of Kersham Island near the Strait of Hormuz. He said the pollution had drifted toward the coast from the Persian Gulf, with signs that a foreign bulk carrier may be the source. Baghai said the region's waters and marine ecosystem have been seriously damaged by both visible and hidden sources of pollution, causing what he describes as trillions of dollars in damage to Iran's coastal areas. Meanwhile, Pakistan says it is ready to assist a Saudi-led maritime coalition in the region after 3 of its sailors were killed in a Houthi attack in the Red Sea. Mariam Zia has more from Islamabad.
3 Pakistani sailors have been killed in the Red Sea, prompting Islamabad to say it is ready to assist a Saudi-led maritime coalition focused on protecting commercial shipping in the region. The sailors were killed on Tuesday when the vessel Tehama came under attack while sailing through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait of Yemen. Another Pakistani national was injured. The incident came less than 2 weeks after Saudi Arabia established the Multinational Maritime Defense Alliance on the 30th of July. 14 countries, including Pakistan, backed its founding communique. The coalition covers the Red Sea, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, and the Gulf of Aden, with a focus on maritime security and freedom of navigation. At a Foreign Office briefing on Wednesday, spokesman Tahir Andrabi said Pakistan was ready to assist Saudi Arabia and other coalition members in implementing the communique. Deputy Prime Minister Ishaq Dar said Islamabad was also in contact with Saudi and Yemeni authorities over the attack and arrangements for the victims. Pakistan has not yet specified what form its support for the coalition will take. However, the attack has given Islamabad's commitment to the Saudi-led initiative a direct national dimension. Mariam Zia, A News, Islamabad.
Now, for more on these developments, I'm joined by Dr. Hamid Khan Al-Mashriqi, a strategic affairs expert and journalist. Hello and welcome to A News.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
So Trump says the U.S. has total control of the Strait of Hormuz, yet commercial traffic has collapsed to just a handful of vessels, while on the other hand, Iran continues to restrict passage from its own coastline. Does this then expose a fundamental gap between U.S. military dominance in the Gulf and its ability to actually guarantee freedom of navigation?
Yes, definitely. I believe that this is more sort of, building a narrative rather than on the facts on the ground. The facts on ground are very different. We have seen the way Iran have kept establishing their control on Strait of Hormuz for the last 6-7 months. And yes, Americans can claim that they are in control, but on reality, it is very difficult for them still, because we have seen that any oil vessels which needs to pass through, they need a kind of permission, and they need permission from Iranian IRGC and the Iranian Navy, who's controlling the Strait of Hormuz. As the matter of fact, yes, American blockade outside the Strait of Hormuz is established, but if you look at the ground realities, they are a bit different. And if there will be any control of Americans, then the whole Iran system would have collapsed, because this is the biggest trump card Iran have in their hand, and that is the control of Strait of Hormuz. And that's why, I mean, the MOU was signed between Iran and America, because it was clearly saying that what will be the mechanism of Strait of Hormuz, which will be controlled by Iran and Oman jointly. So the statement from President Trump does not reflect the reality on ground, which is very much otherwise, and which is clearly shows that it is all in control of Iran so far. Yes, Americans are trying, but if America will try to use their ground troops to control the Strait of Hormuz, I believe it will be very catastrophic for the American soldiers and Marines. And that's why, we have seen the reports from American intelligence and Pentagon, where they believe that putting the boots on ground on Iran will be extremely risky for the troops. And the claim from President Trump does not reflect the reality so far.
So you're saying that whatever the President of the United States is saying does not match what's happening on the ground, but the U.S. says it does indeed control the waterway, while Iran continues to deny this, saying that it can decide whatever commercial shipping actually moves through the strait. Now, for Gulf states like Saudi Arabia, Iraq, which actually depend heavily on those exports, who ultimately has the greater leverage here?
Definitely, at the moment, the leverage is in Iran's hands, and yes, the dependency of other countries, oil, passage from Strait of Hormuz is very vital. But we have seen that the Iran is trying to establish some kind of mechanism between Oman and Iran. Will be able to have some kind of tariff of like $1 per barrel or something like that, so that let all the oil tankers and all the ships go through from Strait of Hormuz. But I think at this time, what we have seen on reality, that despite of all the efforts from Americans by attacking, by doing all the bombardment, still they are failed to bring Iran on their knees, and Iran's control, Iran's ability to retaliate, Iran's ability to do drone attacks and missile attacks is still there. And while their capability and ability is there, it shows that Americans' plans have failed. And I would like to remind you that in the beginning of this conflict, we heard about the J.D. Vance conversation with Prime Minister Netanyahu, that he was snubbing Prime Minister Netanyahu, that he was misled to Americans by the Israelis about the strength and the capability of Iran to retaliate, which we have seen now in these 7 months conflict. I think this is the time when President Trump have to do the fact check rather than writing everything on social media and truth media. And the fact is that the situation is not in favor of Americans. America have to take some kind of sensible decisions to end this war, and they have to consider the demands of Iran, which they were agreed in the MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, signed by America and Irani president. If they do that, it will help to resolve the conflict.
Indeed, it does sound like a war of words on social media and another on the ground. So we know that Washington has demanded compensation from Iran, and Iran is also demanding compensation for the war. Alongside the lifting of the U.S. blockade and sanctions, Tehran has maintained this for a very long time and is effectively trying, to then leverage this opening and the control of Hormuz as a broader post-war settlement than just treating the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz as just a standalone issue?
Yes, definitely. As as Iranian leadership have clearly said that the Strait of Hormuz status will never be pre-war now. It has to be defined some kind of control by the Iranis, and there will be some established some kind of tariff or something to do the compensation of the war losses of Iran. So this is something which has to be resolved between the local, regional countries and then the OPEC and then the Americans, but it doesn't look like that Iran will let it go like that to the status of pre-war status, because Iran have realized that this is something needs to be encashed now and needs to be helped to compensate their losses in the war. Yes, one thing is very clear that we have seen that American midterm elections are in November, then Netanyahu's election is in October. So they want to use this war to build up their political narrative to show that they have achieved some success. But on ground, the reality is that Iran is clearly stated that they do not want to have any kind of nuclear capability. Rest of other demands of Iranians must be met to resolve that issue, such as lifting the sanctions, releasing their frozen funds, and other things. Because the longer this war takes, the world will suffer more. We have seen how the overall global economy is suffering, and the supply chain, due to supply chain, the oil prices are rising every day. So I think this is the time when American administration have to realize that they should take the decision without the influence of Jewish lobby, which is more likely to controlling and more likely encouraging to carry on this conflict. But the reality in favor of American is to end this war, the sooner the better. I believe that this is what the Western world is looking for. This is what the rest of the world is waiting for, that Americans government should take the decision what is in favor of the world and in the favor of the people of America, rather than only working or taking it as a political, mileage.
Briefly, before I let you go, how long then can the global oil market absorb a restricted Strait of Hormuz before the economic pressure becomes significant enough to force either Washington or Tehran to compromise?
Look, within last 3 months, the world have used 5 million barrel of their reserved oil from their strategic assets due to this blockade of Strait of Hormuz, which means that another 3 months, up to 4 months, the blockade of Hormuz will bring a turmoil in the region and in the world where there will be catastrophic situation in terms of supply chain of the oil. So they have to resolve this, I believe, within next 30 to 40 days. Otherwise, the shortage of the oil, the prices will be unbearable for the any economy in the world, especially for the third world countries, and for the modern world as well. So it is maximum there is a 30 to 60 days windows before it get on a very catastrophic economical devastation to the rest of the world, and it will impact badly to everywhere.
Dr. Al-Mashriqi, thank you so much for your time on A News.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. My pleasure.
After the break, Ukraine strikes at major Russian grain terminals in a Black Sea port attack. Stay with us. Welcome back to A News. A major Ukrainian attack on Russia's Black Sea port of Novorossiysk has halted operations at 3 grain terminals, raising wheat prices. The disruption comes as Russian attacks severely restrict Ukraine's own agriculture exports, raising wider concerns about food supplies.
3 major grain terminals at Russia's Black Sea port of Novorossiysk halted operations after Ukrainian strikes on Wednesday, disrupting exports from one of the world's largest wheat suppliers. Wheat futures rose by around 3%. Russia, the world's largest wheat exporter, said it was considering alternative routes through Baltic and Caspian ports, the Far East and overland. Moscow's foreign ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova accused Kyiv of seeking to create chaos in the global food market for the benefit of some Western countries. She said the attacks would drive up food prices and increase pressure on countries in the global south and east. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said the attack targeted Russia's naval base and the infrastructure supporting its Black Sea fleet. He said air defense positions, piers and port facilities were hit. Meanwhile, Russian attacks on Ukrainian ports and vessels cut Kyiv's grain shipments by 76% in the first 2 weeks of August, compared with a year earlier.
The scariest thing right now is that we have nowhere to put this grain. And today, with the blockade Russia is imposing on Odessa and its ports, through which we used to export about 4.5 million tons, this is truly a disaster for all farmers.
Russia and Ukraine account for more than a quarter of global wheat exports, leaving countries dependent on Black Sea grain increasingly exposed to shortages and higher prices.
Now, another Ukrainian air attack has caused a fire at an industrial complex in Russia's Bashkortostan region. Online retailer Wild Berries has confirmed one of its own facilities was hit in the strike. Bashkortostan Governor Redili Kabirov said a drone attack wounded 2 civilians and sparked a fire in an industrial zone in the city of Salavat. The site is located about 1,300 kilometers from Ukraine's border southeast of Moscow. Ukraine's general staff defended the operation, saying the area is home to one of Russia's largest oil refining complexities. The suspension of grain terminals in Novorossiysk could increase pressure from Russian agricultural products on Kazakhstan's market. Joining me for this story is Professor Nuberlad Nushbayev from Turan University. Professor, hello and welcome to the program.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
So could the disruption of Novorossiysk fundamentally alter Russia's grain export routes, and how exposed is Kazakhstan to becoming a destination for Russian surplus if Black Sea shipments remain constrained?
I think this is a temporary issue, the first side. The second, it will not automatically change the Kazakhstani market first, but Kazakhstan should be ready to be competitive, because such a kind of drone attacks, it may happen at any time. There is no guarantees at all to predict or to stop. The case with agricultural products, surely it will impact to the Kazakhstani markets. Why? Because Kazakhstani Russian grain products, which are losing access to the Black Sea, they don't have alternatives except Kazakhstan. If we look at the map, how Russia is situated right now, so the main doors to the west, to the Europe global market, is blocked because of drone attacks to the Black Sea. Now they try to redirect the products, agricultural products, to Kazakhstan, and within the Eurasian Economic Union, I think they will send to Kyrgyzstan as well. But here is the thing. There is a big problem, which is market asymmetrics. So we can't compare with 140 million markets comparing to the 20 million markets or 6 million markets in Kyrgyzstan. So it will make pressure for the local markets because it may lower the price for Kazakhstani farmers. But I can reiterate it, it will be temporarily. Because of drone attacks, they will not strategically fully redirect their products. But once the issues gets finished, they will continue sending it, exporting it their own products, agricultural products. So all these drone attacks recently on the pipelines, on the export routes, are bringing one step closer to the diplomatic negotiations. I think this, by the end of this year, the sides they should find common solution. Otherwise, time by time, we see the price and the consequences of this war economically is rising and is becoming very difficult to sustain it, not only participating sides, but the rest of the other countries who are externally and related have some consequences, economic consequences, who has strong relations with Russia, either or Ukraine. So therefore, definitely, in order to stop the economic consequences, the sides definitely they should talk in the language of diplomacy, rather than drone attacks or tanks.
Now, Professor, if Russian suppliers start offering grain at discounted prices in Kazakhstan, is this primarily a short-term supply shock, or could it increase a structural disadvantage for Kazakh farmers who cannot compete with Russian prices?
Yes, I have mentioned already, because the farmer in Kazakhstan has been transformed over the last 5 years, including technologies. Now, for example, in Kazakhstan, the farmers in particular, in the southern part, they are implementing AIs and the new technologies in order to increasing the productivities. But however, we should keep in mind there is a logistical issues, there is a sustainabilities, and some, of course, bureaucracies. So therefore, Kazakhstani farmers, the first thing for them is not only to be in competition with the Russian farmers or to keep the price. The main problem, the main goal of the Kazakhstani farmers, I think for now, is to keep the strategies and reforms, their plans, to achieve their plans. This is very important for them because internal demand is also year by year is rising. So therefore, if we get exports from Russian products, definitely it will change market for times. But I think Kazakhstani's economy, it should take into consideration national interest of the local farmers, because we may not know how long time it continue. So Russian disruptions on the Black Seas, losing access to the Black Seas, and it shouldn't come against interest of the local markets, because this is very important for Kazakhstan to have our own products who are grown up here and who has their own potential clients here. So therefore, I can say Kazakhstani markets now is not full of only Russian products, but having from China, from our southern neighbors, and our own products. So therefore, the competition in Kazakhstan is also getting higher for the external parts, in the example of Russia.
Now, how significant, in brief, Professor, is the threat in practice, given Kazakhstan's own grain production, which you mentioned, storage capacity and transport links with Russia? Are we looking at a temporary supply problem or something potentially much bigger?
That's number one issue, because we remember how Kazakhstani farmers, they tried to solve this issue a long time ago, but still, when we have a huge amount of products, agricultural products, it's very hard to keep them in the. So therefore, storage issues and the logistic issues and the bringing to the markets. So all of these additional expenses definitely add up the price. As a result, local products sometimes will come in higher prices comparing with the exported products. So the consumers, by the law of the economy, they usually try to calculate and they will buy cheaper as always. So therefore, most of the time, for Kazakhstani farmers, for them it's very hard to be competitive. So therefore, they get some external fundings from the government in order to provide all of this fund. But now is Kazakhstani economy, Kazakhstani farmers getting one clear signal. So at any time, the situation may change. We don't give any guarantees what happens in our neighbor countries. So therefore, not only farmers, but other sector of economy, I think they should be very competitive at the level of regional. So when at any time, period of time, external products comes, the own products, the local products should be competitive, not only in terms of price, but in terms of qualities, in terms of how it packed, etc., etc. But for now, for Kazakhstani farmers, the number one issue is, of course, the storage for agricultural products and the logistic internally within the Kazakhstan, because the Kazakhstan as a geographically number 9 in the world, for them it's very hard to even to send the products from the southern part to the northern part. It's around 3,000 kilometers. So when it comes to the external competition, for them it will be bring external pressure surely, but I don't think it will continue for a long time, but it will be temporarily.
Professor Nushbayev, thank you so much for your insights on A News.
Thank you so much.
Staying with Russia now, as Chechenia's leader Ramzan Kadyrov has strongly backed Moscow's position on the war in Ukraine while downplaying the conflict's impact on his own republic. A report in The Economist claims that Moscow's support has helped Kadyrov maintain significant control over recruitment and military units at home.
In Chechnya, support for Russia's war in Ukraine has come with an important exception, that the head of the Chechen Republic, Ramzan Kadyrov, has largely avoided sending large numbers of his own people to the front. The Economist says there is little appetite among many Chechens for fighting on Moscow's behalf. People over the age of 35 still remember the 2 wars Russia fought in Chechnya between 1994 and 2009, including widespread destruction and abuse by Russian forces. Kadyrov, who once fought against Russia before switching sides, has ruled the republic since 2007. He has since built a close relationship with Russian President Vladimir Putin and secured substantial financial support from Moscow. The arrangement has allowed him to protect his own position while keeping compulsory recruitment largely out of Chechnya. Instead, fighters from other parts of Russia have been brought into Chechen units. Kadyrov has claimed that more than 70,000 Chechen fighters have been sent to Ukraine, around 9% of the republic's male population. Yet independent Russian outlet Media Zona recorded 539 Chechen military deaths by the 10th of July, which is about 0.2% of Russia's total recorded losses. The difference is also reflected in the Akhmat Special Forces. Its commander says only about a quarter of the unit's fighters are Chechen, with the rest recruited from outside the republic, often for money. The Economist says Kadyrov has therefore been able to demonstrate unwavering loyalty to Putin while presenting himself to Chechens as a leader who protects his people. At the same time, the war has given him another tool for controlling those he considers disloyal, with some people reportedly pressured into military service.
Now there's evidence that Russia is seeking to expand its alternative payment systems as Western sanctions take effect. One rapidly growing network known as A7 is using traditional finance and cryptocurrency to keep cross-border payments flowing.
A Russian payment network called A7 is emerging as a key channel for companies struggling to conduct international business under Western sanctions. Created in 2024 by Russia's defense-focused PSB Bank and Moldovan businessman Ilan Shur, the platform processes cross-border payments through a combination of conventional banking, partner companies, and cryptocurrency. An investigation by the Open Source Center found that A7 routes transactions through companies and financial institutions in several jurisdictions. This allows payments to reach foreign suppliers without relying directly on Western banks. The Wall Street Journal reports that the network has been used to purchase goods, including luxury cars, fruit, and components linked to military drone production. A7 says it handles nearly 20% of Russia's foreign trade payments, worth more than $100 billion annually. These figures have not been independently verified. Shaw was convicted in Moldova of fraud and money laundering over the disappearance of $1 billion from 3 banks. He fled the country and rejects the charges as politically motivated. A7's links to the Russian state were highlighted when President Vladimir Putin appeared by video at the opening of one of its offices. The US Treasury has designated A7 as a platform used for sanctions evasion, while the European Union has also imposed restrictions on the network. The network has announced offices in Nigeria and Zimbabwe, although their level of activity remains unclear. Reuters reports that the company is also considering expansion into Latin America and the Middle East.
Meanwhile, Japan's Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi has protested Russian President Vladimir Putin's visit to a disputed island claimed by Japan. Takaichi called the visit, open quote, absolutely unacceptable, close quote, saying it goes against Tokyo's position on the Northern Territories. The long-running dispute has prevented a formal post-war peace treaty.
As the government of Japan, we have repeatedly made similar requests to the Russian side that President refrain from visiting the Northern Territories. Nevertheless, we strongly protest President Putin's visit to Itorufu Island today. For Japan, issues involving the Northern Territories, particularly matters concerning former island residents visiting family graves, are humanitarian issues. Thus, we have kept channels for dialogue open and have continued to address these matters through talks. But the current situation is extremely regrettable. As for our response going forward, the government will carefully consider appropriate measures.
Now, the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries has cut its forecast for global oil demand growth this year, pointing to weaker demand in Asia. OPEC now expects demand to grow by around 600,000 barrels a day in 2026, down from its earlier forecast of 800,000. China, India, and other Asian markets are expected to see slower growth. However, OPEC is more upbeat about next year, raising its demand growth forecast to around 2.2 million barrels a day from 1.9 million. Asia and Europe are expected to lead that growth. Colombia is turning from rescue operations towards looking at long-term recovery after Monday's devastating earthquake. President Abelardo de la Espriella has announced financial assistance for affected families and businesses, along with plans to rebuild essential infrastructure.
Colombian President Abelardo de la Espriella has declared an economic emergency following Monday's magnitude 7.4 earthquake, which killed 265 people and left nearly 500 missing. The declaration allows the president to introduce measures by decree that would normally require congressional approval.
I have decided to invoke the economic emergency, a mechanism provided for in our Constitution, in order to address this crisis appropriately. The emergency I am proposing will create a miracle fund, an entity that will channel national and international contributions towards the reconstruction of hospitals, schools, buildings, roads, and airports that were damaged by the earthquake.
The government is also preparing utility payments and rental subsidies for affected families, alongside tax relief, financial assistance, and support for small businesses. Rescue operations in Cali remain focused on 7 collapsed buildings, where survivors may still be trapped. Access has been restricted at some sites to help specialist sensors detect movement beneath the rubble and reduce the danger from possible aftershocks. More than 9,500 homes have been destroyed, while landslides have disrupted roads and temporarily halted operations at Buenaventura's ports. International assistance has begun arriving from Peru, Mexico, and El Salvador.
Over in India now, weeks after a mass youth protest in the country ended, demonstrators are threatening to take to the streets again. The so-called cockroach movement, which forced the resignation of the country's education minister over an exam paper leak scandal, has also announced plans to carry out a nationwide audit of government-run schools. Nia Punia has more on what's next for the Gen Z movement.
The Cockroach Janata Party, or the People's Party of Cockroaches, ended its mass protest here in New Delhi 3 weeks ago. It was a protest spanning several weeks. It drew tens of thousands of people to the streets of India's capital city and only ended when the Indian Education Minister resigned and the government adopted stricter legislation to stop exam paper leaks. And now the Cockroach Party says it plans to take to the streets once again. The movement's founder, Abhijit Dipke, says he's been asked several times what's next for the movement after that public demonstration wrapped up, and he says the next protest could happen, quote, very soon. The party says it's throwing its weight behind other ongoing student demonstrations happening around the country, and its members also plan to tour India to listen to the problems that young people face. As India gears up to celebrate nearly 8 decades of being an independent country this weekend, the movement will also launch an audit of government schools, it says. It plans to highlight how rural educational infrastructure remains neglected, claiming that tens of thousands of children across India don't have access to basic facilities like drinking water, electricity, and toilets in state-run schools. Now, more than 60% of India's population lives in rural India. A recent government report also found that 94,000 government schools across India had closed in the last decade, about 25 a day, and this even as more private schools were set up during that same period. Data shows that enrollment at government schools has also fallen to about 49% last year from 71% a decade ago. Now, the quality and affordability of education in India also became a huge rallying point at that cockroach protest in New Delhi, with protesters calling it a fundamental right. The movement has become the biggest show of dissent against Prime Minister Narendra Modi's 12-year-long rule. Experts say if this movement is able to keep a sustained long-term presence on the ground beyond public demonstrations, it could also become a political challenge to Mr. Modi. Neha Punya, 4A News in New Delhi.
Across Europe, governments are sounding the alarm over a sharp rise in anti-Semitic incidents, from verbal harassment to physical violence in major capitals. Official statistics reveal a continent grappling with growing intolerance towards Jews. But as nations in Europe struggle to secure their streets, a very different reality is playing out thousands of kilometers away in a Muslim-majority nation. It raises a difficult question for Europe. Is this wave of hostility truly inevitable? A News has this special report.
Central Rome. A 22-year-old tourist is pepper sprayed, then beaten the next night by a crowd chanting pro-Palestinian slogans. His apparent provocation, wearing a kippah. The attacks prompted Italy's deputy prime minister to call the lack of safety for Jews a national alarm bell. But Rome is no outlier. Across Europe, anti-Semitism remains at historic highs. Last year, Germany recorded over 8,700 incidents, partly due to strict online hate speech laws. The UK logged 3,700 cases, while in France, anti-Semitic acts accounted for more than half of all religious hate crimes. The targeting is starkly disproportionate. In 2025, Austria's Jewish population of just 10,000 faced over 1,500 incidents. In the Netherlands, a community of 30,000 reported nearly 900 acts of discrimination. The fear is so widespread that a recent EU survey reveals 76% of European Jews now actively hide their identity, and the trend is accelerating. While most of Europe is still compiling 2026 data, Britain, a key indicator, recorded over 1,900 incidents in just the first 6 months of this year, a 21% surge, mostly centred in London. As Western capitals increasingly deploy armed police and concrete barriers to secure their Jewish institutions, the picture is notably different on the eastern edge of the continent. In Azerbaijan, a predominantly Muslim nation of 10 million, the Jewish population stands at roughly 30,000 larger than the communities in Austria or the Netherlands. There are no armed guards outside the synagogues in Baku. The community operates openly in a country that shares borders with major regional powers and maintains strategic, multi-billion-dollar energy and defense ties with Israel.
All right, after the break, we'll look at more stories shaping the region. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to A News. Now, Central Asian countries are reshaping their fuel supply routes as disruptions to traditional imports from Russia put pressure on markets. Kyrgyzstan, which has heavily relied on Russian fuel, is now turning to new suppliers. Our correspondent, Fariza Karimzina, reports on whether these changes could actually lead to longer-term shifts.
Kyrgyzstan has started receiving fuel from Belarus, Azerbaijan, Turkey and another European country as it seeks to diversify its supplies, while negotiations with Kazakhstan and China are continuing. According to Kyrgyzstan's Association of Oil Traders, supplies from Russian refineries are now virtually unavailable. Russia had previously accounted for around 90% of Kyrgyzstan's fuel imports. The association expects the situation could begin to stabilize by October, when Russian exporters are expected to increase refining capacity and resume supplies to the Eurasian Economic Union. Rising global fuel prices, however, could put additional pressure on domestic prices. Kyrgyzstan is also working to reduce its reliance on imports by accelerating construction of a domestic refinery with an annual capacity of 450,000 tons. The facility could start operating by the end of 2026 and cover about a quarter of the country's annual fuel demand. Other Central Asian countries are also adjusting their supply routes. Tajikistan tripled fuel imports from Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan in July, while Russian petrol supplies fell by half. Uzbekistan has significant domestic fuel production, while Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan remain largely self-sufficient and continue supplying neighboring markets. And against this backdrop, regional media are also discussing Tajik President Emomali Rahmon's proposal to build another major refinery aimed primarily at meeting Central Asia's fuel demand. Fariza Kalimurzana, Almaty, A News.
Georgia's Prime Minister says the Black Sea submarine cable highlights Georgia's importance to Europe's energy and digital connectivity plans. Irakli Kobakidze says EU experts included the project among key regional priorities. Our Nini Nikolashvili has the story from Tbilisi.
Georgia's Prime Minister Irakli Kobakidze says that the Black Sea submarine cable project highlights Georgia's role in regional energy and digital connectivity. Speaking about the EU's list of projects of common interest, Kobakidze said the cable was included by EU technical experts. The project would carry electricity and data across the Black Sea, linking the South Caucasus with Europe. The cable is designed to connect Azerbaijan and the wider Caspian region with European markets through Georgia. It could also support the transfer of renewable energy from the region and strengthen digital connections between Europe and the South Caucasus. Kobakidze also commented on remarks by Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev, saying closer cooperation between Azerbaijan, Georgia and Turkey remains a priority, particularly on connectivity. He said Georgia is committed to strengthening ties with both Baku and Ankara, and described the current momentum in bilateral relations as positive. On the submarine cable, Kobakidze said he hoped practical considerations would prevail as work on the project moves forward. For Georgia, the project is seen as part of wider efforts to strengthen its position as a transit and connectivity link between Europe, the South Caucasus, the Caspian region and Central Asia. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, A News.
Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan has appointed former Parliament Speaker Alen Simonyan as Secretary of the Security Council on Thursday. Simonyan replaces Armen Grigoryan, who had held the position since 2018. Speaking at a government meeting on Thursday, Pashinyan said Grigoryan was attending for the last time as Security Council Secretary. Pashinyan hasn't given a reason for the change or said whether Grigoryan would take up another government post in the future. Now, Afghanistan is facing a worsening humanitarian crisis with children and essential health services increasingly under pressure as funding support for the countries continues to fall. A news correspondent Tamim Bahiz has the details from Kabul.
Save the Children says the situation is becoming increasingly serious, particularly for young children, as funding shortages put both nutrition and healthcare services under growing pressure. According to the organization, around 3.7 million Afghan children under the age of 5 are affected by acute malnutrition in 2026, an increase of 14% over the past 4 years. It says conditions worsened in 2/3 of Afghanistan's provinces during the second quarter of this year, with infectious diseases, poverty, drought and displacement contributing to the crisis. Humanitarian funding cuts have forced nearly 600 health facilities to close or suspend services, affecting around 4 million people. In remote areas, families already travel for hours for treatment, and further closures could leave many without access to essential health care. Save the Children is calling on the international community to provide sustained funding, warning that without urgent support, essential humanitarian programs could be lost, just as the number of children needing support continues to rise. Tamim Bahiz in Kabul, A News.
For a few extraordinary moments, daylight gave way to darkness as millions looked to the skies across Europe. A rare celestial spectacle brought crowds together from city streets to remote observatories as people waited to witness a sight not seen across the region for nearly 3 decades.
Millions of people across Europe have gathered to watch the region's first total solar eclipse in 27 years, with the moon briefly blocking out the sun and turning daylight into darkness. The path of totality crossed parts of Iceland and northern Spain, drawing huge crowds. In Spain, officials expected up to 6 million visitors, particularly in rural areas along the eclipse path and the Balearic Islands. At the Javalambre Observatory in Arcos de las Salinas, the sky fell dark at totality, prompting cheers from locals and visitors. Among those watching was Queen guitarist Brian May. In Aria, crowds also celebrated as the town was plunged into darkness, while telescopes at the Yebes Observatory in Guadalajara captured the eclipse using specialized filters. The spectacle was also visible elsewhere across the continent. In Reykjavik, Iceland, crowds gathered as the moon's shadow reached the country's western coast before moving eastwards. Across the UK, more than 90% of the sun was covered, with skies darkening over London's Tower Bridge as people gathered to watch the partial eclipse. In Poland, crowds in Warsaw and along the Baltic coast watched as more than 80% of the sun was obscured shortly before sunset. On beaches in Phrygian, Italy, people looked skywards wearing protective eclipse glasses and taking photographs, while in Brussels, spectators described the event as a once-in-a-lifetime experience. For many across Europe, it was a rare chance to see one of nature's most striking astronomical displays.
And that's the news for this hour. Thank you for joining me.